Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are announcing the next theme in our Themed Letterboxd 4 series, and it is June, so we are celebrating Pride Month. Now, if you're new to this series, I'm going to put this video in a playlist with all the rest of the entries so far this year, so you can go back and watch any of those. But basically, all this is every month we just take a different theme, a different category, and then we look at what my Letterboxd 4 would be in that specific category. So, for example, I've done comedies, I've done sports movies, I've done animated films. This is the most recent one. So, you can go and look at any of those. There is a preview video that's supposed to be kind of a little bit closer to the beginning of the month, which is this one, where we just go through and I tell you, like, what my current Letterboxd 4 is, plus some contenders, some films that I've seen, but it's been a little while, and then plus some films that I haven't seen, but I'll watch this month to see if they crack that Letterboxd 4. And then at the end of the month is when, or, the beginning of the next month is when we'll post the results video for that. But again, we're just taking a look at the preview, the setup, essentially, for this video. Now, in these videos, I like to do right here, like to talk about, like, kind of the rules and the exclusions. So the rules on this are very loose. Now, there's some categories where I have to kind of make the rules very strict, and I have to make them very kind of airtight in order to, know what is or isn't eligible. And then there's some that are pretty simple, like animated movies. You can kind of tell what's going to be there. Best Picture winners was January. You can tell what's in there, what's not. There are some like this, though, for Pride Month, where the only rule, the requirement, is that it has to be like an LGBTQIA plus friendly film. And this was the thing that when I came up with this idea, when I knew I was going to do this, because I was really excited to do this and to kind of explore this genre and kind of explore some of these communities, and then I thought about it, and didn't know exactly how I was going to narrow this down, or when I was going to come in and determine that something isn't meeting the criteria, because I looked up a couple lists, because this is always kind of my process, is I look at my own Letterboxd and I look and I see movies on there and I say, okay, this is gonna fit, this is gonna go in, this is not, and then I look and I see, like, I'll look on lists online, or I'll look at other people's lists on Letterboxd, and I try and pick and choose, from their lists, like, oh, that's a great idea, or this is something I've been wanting to see. And this is one that I found it was kind of hard to get, like, a good consensus, because I would look at other people's lists and there would be movies on there that I'd seen, but I wouldn't necessarily consider it like an LGBTQ film. And sometimes it's for a couple reasons. Sometimes those films are in there because, like, a background character, maybe has a subplot, or just, it is, like, bisexual, or is, there is some, they are a part of, a community in the LGBTQ community that, that they're being represented, and so people count it as, like, an LGBTQ film. But I was thinking, like, I kind of want it to be more of, like, the central focus. So for me, the one kind of rule that I'm putting in there is either the main character has to be part of the LGBTQ community, or the film, the plot in general, is kind of centered around, around the community as a whole. So we're not going to have anything like really Disney, their attempts of either throwing in two characters in the background, there maybe we're holding hands for a brief second, and so then, or I don't even remember what the character's name, but the whole Onward situation of, like, after the film was released, trying to, like, pat themselves on the back for the first, gay character or whatever, first lesbian character, when there was no indication that was a lesbian character. So those type of films are excluded. But then there are some other things that I kind of was thinking about in terms of this category that I was, like, kind of debating on whether they should count or not. There are certain films that maybe on the surface, because this is another thing, I was looking at a whole bunch of lists, that there were films on there that I'm like, I wouldn't consider that like an LGBTQ film, but the community has, it's a favorite of theirs, or they've kind of, the one that comes to mind is, like, the Babadook, which I'm not going to put in this video, but there was a couple years ago, or it's probably been 8 years ago or so at this point, but there was the whole thing of, was it Netflix or someone, they put the Babadook in, like, an LGBTQ collection, and so it kind of just became this, like, thing that everyone just claimed, the Babadook is an LGBTQ icon, and so there's things like that, or I've seen a lot of, like, the Wizard of Oz, is mentioned, at times, and I get it, where sometimes, a film, or like Luca, for example, a film where it's not necessarily an LGBTQ film, but I totally can understand how you are interpreting some of the themes as, LGBTQ themes. And so this was one for me that coming up with this initial list I think was the hardest part. Throughout the month, it's going to be really easy to just watch films and then at the end decide whether I thought that it kind of fit the vibe or not. But I'm just letting you know now that the rules for this are going to be a little bit open-ended. And then very quickly, we're just going to talk about the exclusions. As a reminder, if you haven't seen the, I guess the first, just letting you know if you haven't seen any of the previous videos. But if a film is selected in a Letterboxd for a previous month, it's ineligible for future months. So things like Moonlight that were in the Best Picture Letterboxd for, and Booksmart that were in the Comedy Letterboxd for, they're going to be excluded. And then like Everything Everywhere All at Once is excluded too because it was in Best Picture lineup, but that's another one where I didn't, even though I get that Joy is a lesbian and I get that that is kind of a central part, I still don't necessarily think of, like, if I'm thinking of what Everything Everywhere All at Once is, I still think of like five other things before I think of it as like an LGBTQ story. And so that's where this is tough because like I wouldn't, and my initial thought is I wouldn't have considered that for this video, but then I looked at people's lists and it was on like everyone's lists. So I guess I have to mention it here that it is part of the exclusions. So let's take a look at the current Letterboxd 4. All of Us Strangers, Close, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and Rocket Man. Now, if you're familiar with my channel at all, you know Portrait of a Lady on Fire was going to be here because it was in my Letterboxd 4. I did a whole video on it on a previous Letterboxd series, so I'll put the video to that, or the link to that, in the description on this. So I think Portrait of a Lady on Fire, I think you knew was going to be here. Rocket Man is another one for me that I kind of was like, because when I think of Rocket Man, I think of it being a biopic. I think of it as being, I guess a drama, but like a biopic first and foremost. But then the more I thought about it, I'm like, well, it's a biopic of an LGBTQ icon, so yeah, like it feels like it would fit. So that's why I've got Rocket Man in here. Close and All of Us Strangers, two great films that I saw once a couple years ago when they both came out. I remember being very emotional at both of them. I think Close made me cry. I don't remember if All of Us Strangers made me cry, but I remember being very kind of like emotionally, affected by both of those. So really excited to give those a rewatch. And then let's take a look at the three contenders: Challengers, I Saw the TV Glow, and Pain and Glory. Now, I Saw the TV Glow obviously very easily fits here in this category. Pain and Glory is one that I haven't seen in a couple years. Like, it's been, since it came out, really, because I watched it. I think that was that came out, I think, the first time I really became like a big Oscar completionist and watched everything. So I watched all the not animated, international films that year, and Pedro Almodovar's Pain and Glory with Antonio Banderas, and I believe it has Penelope Cruz. I could be misremembering her for someone else, but I remember that being a really good film. I'm excited to rewatch that. Challengers is another one that was kind of like iffy for me if I wanted to count it, because initially I didn't think of it as an LGBTQ film, even though there are very clearly bisexual themes in the film, like in all of Luca Guadagnino's films. I should say at least the majority of Luca Guadagnino's films. So even though they're there, I almost didn't consider it. But then again, I looked at other people's lists, and Challengers is on a whole lot of people's lists. So again, I'm kind of being a little bit more flexible with what I'm considering for the category, being a little bit more open-minded, and hopefully just going to watch a lot of different films, and then toward, in the results video, that's where I can kind of clean up a little bit and decide what I really thought fit in the category or not. And then three films I haven't seen: But I'm a Cheerleader, God's Own Country, and Paris is Burning. Now, Paris is Burning is one that was on like a lot of people's lists, and especially if I looked on Letterboxd lists, if I sorted by like highest rating, Paris is Burning is like highest rated on Letterboxd on the majority of people's lists. So the fact that I saw it so many times, I feel like I've heard about it before, but I'm not super familiar with it. I think I know it's a documentary, but that's kind of about it for what I know. So super excited to see that. God's Own Country is one that I think I remember kind of hearing the title, because this came out a couple years ago, but really don't know a whole ton about it at all. And then But I'm a Cheerleader is one that is kind of an interesting inclusion, I guess, because I know nothing about this film. I've seen the poster multiple times, but this is the first time that, as I was putting this down, this was the first time I looked at it and realized that it's Natasha Lyonne. Because again, I don't know anything about this movie other than that, but I had seen the poster, and so I think I always kind of just assumed it was just some comedy. I don't know if in my head I always just kind of like combined it with like Bring It On or like other cheerleader movies, that I was just like, that's what this is. And I just never thought of it as like an LGBTQ film. And then when I saw this, because I kept looking up lists and this kept popping up on a lot of people's lists, and then I saw, and then I started thinking, I was like, okay, well, maybe, there are some lesbian characters or some gay characters. And then I read like a tagline for this, and I saw that there is, I don't know if it's like the main subplot of the movie, but a lot about like conversion therapy. And so once I saw there was clearly some themes going on here, I felt like, I owed it to myself to put this on the list, especially because seeing that it had like a 4.0 on Letterboxd, that was way higher than I thought for a movie that like I just haven't heard really a whole ton about. And then, as always, these 10 films right here, these are the 10 I'm guaranteeing that I'm going to watch this month. But I'm always, if you've seen the last couple videos, I always watch way more than just these 10. So leave your suggestions down below in the comments what some of your favorite LGBTQ films are, and I'll make sure to check some of those out and watch as many films as I can this month. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video. Again, make sure to leave those comments down below. And then I also just want to point out that, a quick little shout out here at the end. I started today because it's on Spotify, so I started listening to the audiobook of Alonso Duralde's book. It's called Hollywood Pride, a celebration of LGBTQ plus representation and perseverance in film. I started listening to that at work because I want to find some films that like I've never even heard of, or these films that are really integral, because Alonso himself is a gay man, and so he's written the book on kind of LGBTQ history in Hollywood, and so I really kind of wanted to look at some things from his perspective and see some of his suggestions and recommendations. So I'm going to put a link to the audiobook on Spotify in the description as well, because as I'm hopefully within the next week or so will have kind of listened to that book, and hopefully we'll have some more suggestions, or some more like suggestions from Alonso himself. And also, if you maybe don't know who Alonso is off the top of your head, or maybe the name sounds familiar, they have a channel here on YouTube called Breakfast All Day, him and Christy Lemire. So I also just recommend you go to their I'll put a link to their YouTube channel, Breakfast All Day, in the description as well, because they're a great film review, film criticism channel here on YouTube. If you'd like to like this video and then subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future episodes in this series or any of the other series that I have going on my channel, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.